Hello, everybody! What the Flick is What the Fright this month. We are talking about some of the best horror movies of the 21st century. The wonderful Tyler MacIntyre is here to tell us about a couple of movies, but he also directed a really cool horror comedy that I saw at South by Southwest this year called Tragedy Girls. Can you tell us a little bit about it and take us into a clip?
Yeah, so this is about two best friends in high school who happen to be serial killers, and so it's kind of a behind the scenes of a slasher movie, and yeah, we've been getting a really good response to it at South by, and I'm very excited it comes out Friday. So.
Let's take a look.
Sometimes I just feel like nothing I do matters, like I'm not special.
We only got one retweet today from your mom.
Sad.
We were just wondering if maybe you could give our blog a shout out.
A shout out from me would be a little off-brand.
I have 15,000 followers. You know what that means in a community like this?
More to the left. His heart's more to the left. You're just hitting bone, dude. I'm trying.
Phone's off, but it's a matter of life and death.
You bitches are crazy!
I just want to know what's next for the Tragedy Girls.
Okay, so what you have here is a very sharp, I think, horror comedy. And when you make a horror comedy, you have to make some really particular decisions. How scary do you want it to be? How funny do you want it to be? Do you want one to overpower the other? How do you make those decisions?
For me, it's a really more like moment to moment. Like my background's kind of as an editor, so you know, I try and when I'm on set directing, I tend to shoot stuff that's maybe a little bit sillier, a little broader, and then stuff that's a little bit darker. I kind of get you know, a few options so that I can control the tone a little bit more editorially. And so you know, because you have to kind of get the dynamics of like how the overall piece flows, and it's nice to be able to kind of back it off here and make it a little bit more serious here, and you can. You know, I think you know, ride that wave a little bit more specifically. Whereas if you kind of commit too hard to certain tones in certain moments without having perspective, then that's where you run into problems and things start to become too silly and people start to turn off, or they become, you know, too dark, too real at the wrong time.
You know, what I think is really interesting about Tragedy Girls in particular is that on some level the comedy is the horror, because it is very disturbing that these two characters can make such light of what they are doing that it becomes funny to them, and that we are in their world and it becomes funny to us.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a dark sense of humor to it. Like we try and keep it pretty character based, you know. Like, but ultimately it's satire. We just kind of like it's amusing to me to try and you know, push this supposed like millennial narcissism to like actual like psychopathic levels, and it opens up a lot of, you know, essentially things that I think are, you know, pretty amusing, but ultimately, like, it's, you know, it was aimed to be, you know, just satirical and a little absurd, but you know, we're hoping that relationship, the friendship between the girls at the core of the movie remains real.
You know, we've seen a lot of movies kind of struggle with how to make the internet in particular scary. Anytime a new technology, a new trend, a new fad comes along, horror movies try to jump in, try to make it scary. And I find that what a lot of movies have done, maybe gone down the wrong path, is they tried to make the technology scary, and here it's a matter of who is using it and why.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like for us, like we just talked about kind of being a part of their world, and you know, like that's like they're you know, after fame to a certain extent, but they're like that just is meant to give their life meaning. You know, like it's so we wanted it to be like immersed, you know, seamlessly with how they interact with the world, but at the same time, like, you know, have a bit of resonance in that it's you know, like I think social media, you know, has become such a big part of our life, you know, in such a small amount of time, and we're still kind of reeling with the idea of how it sort of disassociates us from things that are like, you know, we're hearing about horrible things constantly, you know, like anywhere we look, and it's hard to kind of process those as real events.
Yeah, you can become famous for being famous in this world, and that leads to a certain shallowness.
Yeah, definitely, and the movie's like, you know, ultimately like the girls are very, very narcissistic, you know, and that's part of like one of their many moral flaws. But you know, we're hoping that people can kind of you know, engage with it regardless, even though the girls are, you know, somewhat morally deplorable.
Can we talk a bit about the opening of the movie? Do you consider that a spoiler to talk about Kevin Durant's character a bit, or?
Yeah, I mean, like it's a little spoilery, but it's not that crazy. I mean, Kevin Durant is great. You know, he's you know, obviously been in you know, a lot of great genre stuff, and he's a tremendous actor, just a sweetheart of a human being. And so like, but he kind of represents sort of this you know, a lot of the kind of typical slashers that we see, you know, this kind of like, you know, masked guy with a axe or machete or whatever, just that very brute force, like male power fantasy stuff that's going on in a lot of slashers, and he's kind of, you know, we kind of flip that role on its head a little bit.
It's kind of cool to see like that older idea of what horror is and what even serial killers can be versus what they are in the 20th century, what they are from a different, even gender perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we wanted it to be like very grounded in the lead girl's point of view.
Yeah, yeah. Is that a concern when you're making it though? Because you know you want to keep really stuck in this world that you've created, but there's also this slasher world kind of going on as well. You kind of got two movies in the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we wanted to kind of pit ourselves very much like in like, you know, filmland. You know, like it's about you know, because it's a story about, you know, violence in a high school, like and that today has very strange, you know, very specific connotations, and it could get very serious very quickly.
Yeah.
We wanted to equate it to like, no, this is a slasher movie first, and like, you know, representation of reality second, because and that's why the performances are a bit heightened, and like the general tone's like quite poppy, and it's meant not to like there are authentic things in it in terms of like relationships, but that said, like the world itself, like, you know, is very fast moving and very bombastic.
Well, a lot of people have been comparing this movie to Heathers, and I think that's somewhat apt. But the other movie I kept thinking about when I was watching it is actually Better Off Dead, which is also an extremely heightened version of high school. And you have characters like Josh Hutcherson, who feels like he came out of a different film just to sort of visit this and to be like that, almost unbelievably cool.
Yeah, and totally. I mean, and Josh is playing like this hilarious, like, you know, like archetype, you know, that he's sort of kind of a part of, you know, that kind of teen beat, like, you know, idol, you know, like on a motorbike, you know, like this kind of like, you know, 90s idea of masculinity, which is kind of pushed. And you know, and he did a very great job of, and was very much on board with the idea of kind of harpooning that, and you know, so you know, and like in terms of like I wanted it to feel like high school and like teenage years, you know, where everything's emotional and very you know, extreme, and you know, like I remember hearing this quote from somebody kind of secondhand about Brick, you know, like, and Ryan Johnson was saying like, well, it's not what high school was like, it's like what high school felt like, and I always thought that was a really smart way to approach it. Like the idea of like everything matters.
That's kind of how. That's a lot of my favorite high school movies like that. I feel like Better Off Dead is like that. 3 O'Clock
totally.
High is like that.
3 O'Clock High was a huge inspiration for us. Like visually,
totally
that movie is so underrated. It's like actually like legit a masterpiece. Like if anyone has not seen 3 O'Clock High, like that was on cable a lot when I was growing up. But like if you haven't seen it recently,
it's
like
faded. Like people don't talk about it enough, and it is just this. It's like Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2, but it's a John Hughes movie.
Yeah, and it does not. Yeah, and like it's kind of has like, I mean, they pretty much did a remake of it recently with Fist Fight.
Yeah, I noticed. I thought that too. I was like, did they just do like a sequel and have him? I was a teacher, and no, it's a totally different movie.
Yeah, totally. And it's but yeah, 3 O'Clock High really, like in my opinion, really holds up. Like I think that you know, great on so many levels, and we wanted kind of like that fresh visual style, but at the same time, like. You know, like something like Detention, which I really love, you know, like pushes that to a very like crazy place, and people, it kind of turned off a couple people. So so we're kind of playing the middle a little bit, I think.
Yeah, you can go too far. I think we've seen that over and over again, and you can like maybe sort of there'll be like this core demo who will love your movie if you go entirely in one direction. But there's a lot of people who just, you can't get them into the theater. It's hard to make that trailer even.
Yeah, totally. And so we were trying to kind of, you know, like, and part of it was just, you know, like time. Like I think a lot of, like it requires a lot of resources to kind of go that like, you know, with everything is like a super violent specific camera movement.
Yeah.
Whereas we had a more modest schedule, modest budget. So trying to kind of make it interesting during the restraints we had.
You have a fantastic cast. And in particular, your two tragedy girls, Alexandra Shipp and Brianna Hildebrand. And a lot of people are just making the obvious connotation, they're both X-Men.
Yeah, no, we're getting a lot of that. I mean, you know, and that's the thing is like this is Brianna's, you know, third movie, you know, but like she has 2 great movies before this, like First Girl I Love, which won the Audience Award at Sundance, which is excellent if you haven't had a chance to check it out, and you know, obviously Deadpool, but you know, I think she's on The Exorcist now, and just been making some very smart decisions for like, you know, kind of you know, how emerging she is, and then Alex, who's you know, like I think has more you know, more things behind on our more roles behind her. But as a, I think it's very much their movie, and they've brought a lot to it, and like they're really the heart and soul of the movie.
What were you looking for when you were casting? Like, what was the thing?
Well, I mean, I just wanted girls who kind of like comfortable in their own skin, and could also. I was dreaming of having like a relationship to kind of build upon, and they already knew each other a little bit based on like doing Marvel press together, and so and they really kind of, I think, stepped up to the plate with because there's not actually as many scripts as I think there should be out there for young actresses to kind of like really, like take ownership over a film. Like often they're second or third on the call sheet, and it's harder to kind of. But this movie's like 90 pages of dialogue with these girls, and it's like about them. They're in every scene, and so I wanted actresses that were strong enough to embrace that and like be so fundamental to the process. Yeah.
Well, Tragedy Girls is coming out in limited release on October 20th, and it's expanding later.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it should be 50-ish screens on the 27th.
Then by all means see it. It's a great Halloween horror movie pick, and it's really funny, and I really dug it, so thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.